So greetings, everybody. I'm Alan Burkitt-Gray, as Mary just said, and I am the Secretary of the Greenwich Industrial History Society. And I'm going to tell you tonight about what I've called the South London's failed canals, because that's the truth. I'm going to cover an integrated canal system, one stretch from the Thames at Deptford to Croydon, Forest Hill, Peckham and Camberwell. But the Croydon Canal, that one that reached through Forest Hill to Croydon, didn't last very long. It was indeed an abject failure. So that's me, that's the title. I'm going to start here at Little Venice in northwest London, a long way from southeast London. I hope you recognise it. It's the main junction of the surviving canals north of the River Thames. Can I ask people to mute themselves, please, because I can hear a lot of background noise. Can you mute yourself, please? Thank you. I'm going to start here at Little Venice in northwest London. It's the main junction of the surviving canals north of the River Thames. There's a map that's on display at the junction. And there, if you go from Little Venice going southeast, that canal leads to Paddington Basin. And decades before Isambard Kingdom Brunel chose Paddington as his London terminus for the Great Western Railway, Paddington was the main focus of the Grand Junction Canal. Westwards, there, the canal reaches the edge of London and it goes south to the river at Brentford, then north to the, and then from there to the Thames at Reading, where there's the Kennet and Avon Canal to Newbury and Bath and Bristol, and the Thames goes on to Oxford. And from there northwards you can get to Birmingham and Stoke and the Potteries and Leicester and Nottingham and Manchester and Leeds, and indeed the whole industrial revolution cities of England. And then eastwards, the canal reaches the edge of eastwards via the Regents Canal through Camden and Islington, and they were then industrial areas. We're talking about 220 years ago, to the Thames at what's now Limehouse Basin. Now, of course, there are water buses past the zoo to Camden and beyond, but there weren't then. Oh, and by the way, when it was built, it was the Grand Junction Canal. It wasn't until a reverse takeover by the Regents Canal in the 1930s or 20s that it became the Grand Union Canal, but that's the name we all know it by today. And when the Little Venice Junction was built, this was completely rural. As you'll see from this picture, the houses followed. Now, let's compare this busy canal junction to what I shall fancifully call the Little Venice of South London. It's just south of Deptford, close to Millwall's New Den football ground. There we are. There are no canal boat tours of this system, no cafes, no fancy architecture. Though, as I said a couple of minutes ago, the fancy architecture that today is around Little Venice only developed long after the canal was built. But there was a junction. What did this South Junction connect? It's where the Grand Surrey Canal, you see going through the bridge on the left, met the Croydon Canal, which is on the right, along what's called Mercury Way. And that path on the right-hand side of that right-hand picture is the old towpath of the Croydon Canal. Westwards, the Grand Surrey Canal might, if things had gone better for the developers, have reached the River Thames at Kingston, and then to Reading and Oxford, and from there to the National Canal System. And here, where Mercury Way is now, a canal went south to Croydon. In that right-hand picture, as I said, that footpath is following the old Surrey Canal towpath. The left-hand picture shows the towpath of the Grand Surrey Canal. That's just above the hedge line there. And here's a better sign that this is an old canal on the bridge over the Surrey Canal Road that I've just showed you. These marks were made by the bridge, made on the bridge by the boaters' ropes so that the horses could haul their boats. It's still there decades, maybe a century after the last horse-drawn boat went past, clearly predating the Danish drainage pipe which has been installed for the railway above. The Grand Surrey Canal lasted commercially for about 150 years, latterly owned by the Surrey Docks Company. Surprisingly, today, 185 years after the Croydon Canal closed, just letting somebody else in. Today, 185 years after the Croydon Canal closed, there are still stretches of water that you can see across South London. And I'm going to take you along some of those later in this talk. The Grand Surrey Canal lasted longer, but there isn't so much as a puddle left today, at least until you get to the Surrey Docks themselves, though there are still some splendid bridges still in place. And as I showed a moment ago, some telltale signs of its days as a working canal. Let's move on. That's Mary Mills wanted me to cover the Royal Arsenal Canal as well. Well, it was, as the name implies, part of the transport infrastructure that was part of the arsenal. And there are remains of it, as you see from this Google view. They're more visible today than when, of course, the arsenal was a highly secret factory, forbidden to ordinary people. When I worked in Woolwich in Calderwood Street from 1973 to the early 1980s, the arsenal was forbidden territory. None of the arsenal area was even shown on maps. It was just a white area, like somebody splurged a load of Tipex on the A to Z or the Ordnance Survey map. Yeah. Today, Peabody, the housing association, plans to fill the old canal in, according to this report from local blogger from the murky depths. If you know more about plans or want to know more, please contact Mary Mills. But it's not yet a failed canal, though I don't think it carries any traffic. Let's go back to the Croydon Canal. As I indicated just now, one of the canals I'm going to talk about is the Croydon Canal. It was authorised in 1801, opened in 1809, and sold and closed in 1836. That's 27 years of commercial service. It's a commercial disaster, and I'll tell you why later in this talk. The southern end was here, where West Croydon rail and bus and tram stations are today. There's a good historical reason for that, which we'll get to later. But let's look at another map from 1800 with my addition. Sorry, I like maps. You'll have to get used to that. Let's put these two canals in their historical context and look at other transport projects south of the River Thames around 1800. This, by the way, was published by William Faden in 1800, and he was the engraver for the first Ordnance Survey map of Kent in 1801. I've amended this by enhancing the place names. Notice that in 1800 he showed the Grand Surrey Canal. He showed the Grand Surrey Canal as going right the way to the river at Vauxhall, though it never did, all the way from Rotherhithe up here, where we've got the Surrey Docks now. And one of the original points of it was a bypass of the Thames through central London, which was very congested. If you read any history of the docks, you'll realise that boats just queued up in the middle of the river for days or weeks to be unloaded by the lightermen and the dockers. It took a long time, so it's quite natural that they would try and build this bypass through the canal, through central London to Vauxhall, and that was one of the original points of it. It never got beyond Camberwell, which is about there. The lighter blue line also shows a planned branch that was never built towards the Elephant. It's this one up here. There was also an earlier proposal to take the canal even further upstream along the Thames to Kingston upon Thames, along down here on the western side of this map, and to Croydon and Carshalton, as you see down at the southern side of the map. They were all never built. But both of these projects, the Croydon and the Grand Surrey Canal, started at almost exactly the same time as
All right.
could you mute yourself? Could you mute yourself?
Oh, well done.
Please?
Thank you, Donna.
Could you mute yourself, please? You're interrupting the talk. Every time you talk, the system broadcasts what you're saying, so please mute your mics. Otherwise, I shall have to do it. Both of these projects, the Croydon and the Grand Surrey, started at almost exactly the same time as the Surrey Iron Railway and its sister company, the Croydon, Merstham and Godstone Iron Railway, which went off to the south here. And I've shown Surrey Iron Railway on the map as well. Let's look at a whole list. You can read that. Surrey Iron Railway opened from 1802 from the Thames to Garrett Lane in Wandsworth, and then from 1803 to Croydon. Its extension opened in 1805. Grand Surrey Canal, again authorised around 1800, 1801, was built to the Old Kent Road in 1807. The Croydon Canal, about the same sort of time it was authorised. It went as far as Croydon by 1809, and then the Grand Surrey was extended to Camberwell and then south to Peckham by 1826. There was a much earlier plan. If you go further back, there's a story for which there's no evidence at all that in 1016, so 1,005 years ago, King Canute, or King Canute, if you want to risk the chance of an embarrassing typing mistake, had a defensive ditch from Rotherhithe to Vauxhall or Lambeth while he was trying to reclaim the throne from the Anglo-Saxons. The idea was to drag his boats along this canal below London Bridge. From below London Bridge upriver. There's even this cigarette card published in 2012 by Ian Visits. And if you want to speculate, search for Canute. The old spelling will probably be better on the Ian Visits site. But remember that the whole area was very boggy, very marshy 1,000 years ago. So I think we can probably discard that idea. Let's come back to the canals as built. And these are not the speculative ones, not the ones going off to Kingston or Carshalton or whatever. These are the ones that were actually built. That yellow line you see at the eastern side of the map is the boundary between Kent and Surrey, as it was then. Of course, all subsumed into Greater London now. The blue line is the Croydon Canal, the one going south, the one going west. From Surrey Docks is the Grand Surrey Canal. Now, it's, as I said, closed when the Croydon Canal closed when the London and Croydon Railway bought it, just over £40,000. The Grand Surrey Canal, which connected to the Croydon Canal at the never quite little Venice of South London, opened, as I said, from 1807 to the Old Kent Road, reached Camberwell in 1810, and then a southern branch to Peckham in 1826, and it lasted a century and a half. It was better than the Croydon Canal, but it still died. So why, the big question is, why did the South London canals die and the North London canals survived to this day? Let's have a look at a national map of the English and Welsh canals. After World War II, when most transport was nationalised, the canals north of the river became part of what was then the British Waterways Board. And in 2012, that was succeeded by the Canal and Rivers Trust. And this map shows the navigable waters of England and Wales, including the canal systems. And my family and I have travelled on lots of them, always in hired boats, from Skipton in the north, which is where this is, to the Kennet and Avon in the south, and these are all the Kennet and Avon. And my wife Joan, who's listening to this, will remember navigating that amazingly treacherous lock at the bottom right of that screen. And across the Welsh border on the Llangollen Canal and across the Pont Cysylltu aqueduct, which you see there. And that's Torta Mary and St Paul. And the Grand Union is joined to a national network of canals that reaches Manchester and Leeds. And this is Goole, the canals in Goole, my birthplace, which we visited on the canals a few years ago. The parents of Isabella Crampton, my maternal grandmother, actually worked a canal boat on the air and coal to navigation, carrying coal to Goole. And the coal was unloaded on that machine at the right-hand side. My other grandparents lived just about 300 meters from there, and I could hear the coal being unloaded in the night. And here's my grandfather, Harry Crampton, master of a barge, aged only 22, listed in the first census return of the 20th century. His barge isn't named, but on census day, which was on Sunday the 31st of March to Monday the 1st of April 1901, he was master of a boat that was moored at Chadwick Street in Leeds, which today is right by the Royal Armouries Museum, and that's Joan and Paul by the Royal Armouries Museum in 2003, so 102 years after that census, in our Howard narrowboat Rosenbury, outside the museum. And as I say, the waterways north of the river remained a major trading route between the London docks and the industrial areas of North and West London, and onto the Midlands and the North, with two-way traffic. These two books, excellent books, give accounts of how important the canals were in World War II, telling of women drafted to work on the canals, namely the Grand Union between London and Birmingham, and others onwards beyond Birmingham to Manchester and other points north. On the left, Susan Wolfett was an actor trained at the Old Vic, and she married the actor Donald Wolfett. The Ministry of War Transport called her up to work a narrowboat from Limehouse Basin, as it is now, was then Regents Canal Basin. And Emma Smith, on the right, became a writer, and Maiden's Trip was her first book, and a personal account of her life on the Grand Union, and launched her writing career. Do find them if you can. And industrial historians will have heard of Tom Rolt, LTC Rolt, who wrote a book which has disappeared from this. No, it's sorry. I'm going to go back. Tom Rolt wrote a book called Narrowboat, a great story of a journey by him and his then wife through the canal system in their boat Cressy. Even though the canals, this is 1939, 1940, were becoming blocked and hard to navigate, his wife Angela left him to join Billy Smart's circus. And in 1846, as you see here, Rolt and his friend Robert Akerman decided at this point at the top of the Tartabig locks on the Worcester and Birmingham Canal to found the Inland Waterways Association. There is this monument and a plaque nearby on a seat. And welcome to the people tonight who are joining us from the Inland Waterways Association. I took this 10 years ago, 2011, when we had another family holiday that included the Tartabig flight, and this shows Lucy and Mary, our daughters, with Joan on the far right, on one of the many locks on the Tartabig flight. That's why I can speak of how long it takes, and I'm going to do this in a moment, how long it takes to go through a lock flight, and that's very material to the failure of the Croydon Canal. Sometimes you whiz through the locks, sometimes you're stuck behind 2 or 3 boats going in the same direction, and others coming the opposite way. As I've hinted, all these modern canal pictures are of our many family canal holidays over the past 20 years. But it goes back further. Here's Joan and me, my wife Joan and me, in 1980, so 41 years ago, on a trip along the Kennet and Avon with the Greater London Industrial Archaeology Society. There we are, highlighted at the centre right there. And so, as I've said, the canals north of the Thames are thriving, busy even, probably with more boats than they had in their peak industrial use as an industrial waterway. And there's also, largely because there's a community of people who live on narrowboats, including at one time my daughter and her husband, it's Mary and Till. They bought the boat and they called it Frog. We bought it south from the Midlands through that tunnel. The bottom picture shows Frog moored in the Paddington Basin in 2016. But back south again, safely back south of the river. No such thing as Camden Lock or Paddington Basin or Little Venice. This chap's cycling along the route of the former Grand Surrey Canal in Burgess Park in Camberwell. The South London canals were isolated from the rest of the country's canal system. In the early 20th century, what survived of them, essentially the Grand Surrey, the Croydon, long since closed, became part of the company that owned the Surrey Docks. So the Grand Surrey Canal became a sort of longitudinal dockside. I'll show you a picture of it later, stretching from the dock itself to Camberwell, long after the Croydon Canal had vanished from this world. It didn't have to be this way. Back in 1801, as I said, the two South London canals were intended to be significant parts of the country's canal infrastructure. The original plan for the Grand Surrey was to bypass central London and emerge upstream, especially in London south of the river. Kentish clay was the problem. In winter, the roads from London to the south became hard to use. There was an absolute need for a canal. This was the same as north of the river. Yeah, sorry, I've jumped. Let's go back. Let's look at this man on his bike and no hands. This was a time of rapid industrialization, putting huge demands on the inadequate road system all over the country. Remember, in the Midlands, one of the sponsors of the Trent and Mersey Canal was Josiah Wedgwood. He was sick of having his crockery broken on the way from the potteries by road to Liverpool and then by sea to London, or direct southwards to London by road. A waterway meant he lost fewer plates and cups and saucers and teapots and all the fancy stuff as well. And this was also a time of war with France following the Revolution of 1789. The war would go on until the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. And a quarter of a century of war. And that meant that coastal shipping had to face the continual threat of enemy action. Hence, the increasingly suggested view by industrial historians that the fact of war supported investment in canals to keep trade away from the coast entirely. We touched on that in our October 2021 talk 2 months ago from Dr. Nina Baker about trade along the east coast from the northeastern coalfields to London during the 20th century. Enemy action meant colliers, coal-carrying ships were sunk and many lives were lost. In the 20th century, 100 years before, it's reasonable to think that this was at the top of the canal investors' minds as well. I haven't read a serious economic analysis of this, but it's the sort of thing you read in canal histories and in talks, including one at Greenwich Industrial History Society a few years ago. And those ideas went as far as thinking about ways to bypass entirely the Straits of Dover in order to get from London to places such as Southampton and Portsmouth. And this was one of them. So in 1816, so a year after the Battle of Waterloo, a connection was opened between Guildford on the Way, a bit north of that map in the picture, and that emerges at the Thames at Weybridge, and the Arun, which emerges south of that picture into the English Channel. But bad timing, hey? As you'll recall, 1816 was the year after the Battle of Waterloo, and the welcome outlook of peace after so much war made all these inland waterway bypasses redundant, certainly for long-distance transport. There was also a disastrous slump, partly caused by the end of the war. Lots of former soldiers and sailors were dumped on the scrap heap. And there was something else. The third factor, 1816 was the so-called year without a summer. The year before, Mount Tambora in what's now Indonesia erupted, the largest volcanic eruption since 535 AD. Crops failed around the world. Investment programs were dropped, and apart from the fact 100,000 people died in the actual eruption, to say nothing of the people who died because of starvation because of the year without a summer. That gloomy year weather had a positive point. 19-year-old Mary Shelley, who was on holiday beside Lake Geneva with her lover Percy Shelley, plus Lord Byron and her own stepsister, She wrote Frankenstein on those cold summer evenings by the lake. The way an Arran Canal lasted more than half a century would have connected this South London canal system via the Thames to the English Channel. It was abandoned in 1871, but there's today, as you see from that, a Way and Arran Canal Trust, which is trying to reopen it 150 years out of closure, bit by bit. So plans to extend the Grand Surrey Canal way upstream along the upper Thames, and the Croydon Canal came to the English Channel, both of which were active plans. They never got beyond, they came to naught. They never got beyond lines on the map. They were killed off by peace and a volcano. But while the Croydon Canal never thrived, as I've already said, the Surrey Canal, the Grand Surrey Canal, and they loved the word grand in names in the 19th century, became a ribbon development of industrialization all the way from the Thames to Peckham and Camberwell. I first started getting interested in this in the Grand Surrey Canal when I was researching the beginning of the electric telegraph industry here in Greenwich along the banks of the Thames. No, I haven't got it. I've got a different picture. Along the banks of the Thames. That is Great Eastern, that is a hulk, rather, taking a telegraph cable, and it was then loaded on the Great Eastern to be delivered across the Atlantic. Now, when I was researching that, and Bill, who's on this call, will know better, but I covered this in my talk for the Greenwich Industrial History Society in October 2020, and you can find it on our YouTube channel. But there was a wire rope maker called Cooper Company, whose address was usually just given as Surrey Canal, Camberwell. And you can see it there. It was a wire rope makes on the Grand Surrey Canal, and it also moved, as you see there, to Norwood Wharf on the River Thames. And Cooper also had a factory at Norwood Wharf, and then George Eliot took it over. The company had been bankrupt in 1851, and the following year it bid to make part of the telegraph cable across the Irish Sea. 1854 became Glass Elliott, and so was one of the founders of the telecoms industry in Greenwich and wider southeast London, especially after it merged with the Gutta Percha Company, which has started in the City Road Basin off the Regents Canal, and I showed that in October last year as well. They created Telecom, the telegraph construction maintenance company, and I haven't got the Telecom works. I hoped I was going to have the Telecom works, but never mind. That company today survives as Alcatel Submarine Networks in North Greenwich, owned by Nokia, and it has a continuous history of 150 years. It's not only the oldest telecoms factory in the world, still on the same site, 170 years since it was founded in Greenwich, but has a direct history going back much further to a wire rope maker along the Grand Surrey Canal in Camberwell. But of the Surrey Canal today, there is no trace. Now, that I've shown on that map where the canal was, and there's I'm going to show you, if you look at that church just there, just centre left, St George's Church, but I've looked along that map, there was no sign that I could find of the wire rope maker. According to an early post office directory, it was in St George's Street, which is which was along here. Oh, I got Telecom. Sorry, I've got Telecom, Telegraph Construction Maintenance, Alcatel Submarine Networks in the wrong order. That's Alcatel Submarine Networks, still in Greenwich today. But let's go back to the Surrey Canal. That's St George's Church as it was in the canal days. That's the same view, excuse the trees. I took it while the trees were still in leaf on Wells Way. And almost the same view. The canal has vanished, as you see. There's no sign of any sort of factory. In fact, the whole stretch of Burgess Park, which is now covers the site, of the canal has precious few remains of any type of industry. This is one of the few. It's an old lime kiln, now isolated in the middle of what's now Burgess Park, which was recreated after the canal was abandoned in the 1970s. You can just see St George's Church behind it at the top left there. This is what the canal looked just before closure about 60 years ago. This is just about where Wells Way, so right by the lime kiln and the church, crosses it. This is the same site on the right, taken just a few weeks ago. As you see from some of that wreckage in the canal, the deal trade, the timber trade, was really important. It came from Russia and Scandinavia across the North Sea and up the Thames and into the Surrey Docks. And there's still a road called Deal Porter's Way in front of the giant Tesco in what's now Surrey Quays. They thought Surrey Docks was not a good name for a housing development and a shopping development, so it's been Surrey Quays for the last decade or so. I have here, to show how recent these changes are, an ancient London street guide published by Geographica. It was my first ever. I bought it new when I was a student in Leeds in 1972 for 30 pence, as you see, to help me find my way around London for visits and for interviews. You'll find the Grand Surrey Canal still there, as if in business. St George's Way is there. St George's Way is there just south of the canal. And the church is here, that, and there's a baths just north of the church. Church is still there, baths have gone. And it went all the way west to Camberwell, and then all the way east, across the Old Kent Road, past the Gus Works, Southeastern Gus Board, which Mary will know well about, across into the Surrey Docks, northwards here to Greenwood Dock and up to the river. And the last stub in 1970 or so of the old Croydon Canal was here to buy Millwall football grounds and the Dogs Stadium. This is a composite I put together from 3 pages of that street guide. Let's look at it today. This is Google Street View or Google Satellite View. A long linear green space that stretches from Camberwell in the west to Peckham. Peckham is here, up through industrial warehousing area, across the Old Kent Road, which is there, and then further north east to the river, which is off the side of the map. And I've seen this from the air many times, coming into Heathrow Airport from the east. It's totally unmistakable. And there was a long time I thought, what is that? And then when I got home, I wasn't too tired, looked it up and realised that had been the route of the Grand Surrey Canal. Burgess Park, it's what it's like today. It is named after Jessie Burgess. She was the former mayor of Camberwell, died in 1981, just as the local council was turning it into a Camberwell. Turn it into a park. So there's a great footpath right along it which tracks the route of the canal, and there's still some bridges, including this, which is locally called the Bridge to Nowhere, become a motif for the whole regeneration project. Not a trace of industry, not a trace of even offices or any other buildings around there. Why they demolished the area? There was obviously a lot of bomb damage in World War II, but they demolished the whole area north and south of the canal. So it's a green strip going right across South London. Here's the turn off to the Peckham branch, which now runs through trees where once there was water. Obviously a lot of reconstruction, and plenty of, you see there upper right, there is an old canal bridge. I'm coming to that in a minute. There it is. And you see that footpath on the right, lower right, and then going under the bridge. That is the old towpath. Still there. on the left where that person is walking would have been water until 50 or so years ago, with a lot of debris in it, as we saw from that earlier picture. And again, this again is the clue, similar clue to what I showed you on the main stretch of the Surrey Canal. Those marks of the stonework were made by boaters' ropes. And canals right across the country have lots of these. It's a familiar sight. Anyone who's travelled on the canals in a narrowboat will be familiar with the telltales of the old days when horses pull the boats. Indeed, I'm sure somebody will jump in and say there's blow-up bridge on the Regents Canal, which was blown up in an explosion, a gunpowder boat set it off, destroyed the bridge. They put the bridge back the wrong way around, so those rope marks are on the other side from the canal now, with later ones produced by later boats. So it's got two sets of rope marks, but that's quite a famous feature of the Regents Canal. Let's go on, and this is where the Peckham branch ended here, where the famous award-winning library is now. And just before the end is this milepost, 3.5 miles from the river. It's much photographed. It looks remarkably well preserved. I'm just feeling a little dubious about it, but many sources say it was installed by the Grand Surrey Canal Company. Let's move back to the main drag of the canal. This is remains of what probably was a canal side industrial area. This border you see running from bottom left to mid right is the edge of the wharf, the Glengor Wharf, an old quayside. And if you look carefully back here, mid right, there is a road, and you can just see the road rise slightly because there was a road bridge across the canal just here. And the whole area has been adopted as a garden. Glengor Wharf was built by an engineer called Edward Ellington, who had been earlier apprenticed to John Penn, the engineer of Blackheath Hill. And there is, as you see, not much left today, but this and the lime kiln are the only surviving signs of industry. And indeed, that hut I showed you on the previous slide, and the name of the Glengor Wharf Garden. By the way, I was digging around, there was the Glengor Ironworks across the river in Millwall. And I could speculate, but I have no evidence that this was the site of this company's South London outpost. Others, no doubt, will know better. The canal then disappears under warehousing as you get close to the Old Kent Road, warehousing, trading points, things like that. The Old Kent Road bridged the canal, and I have a fanciful memory that you can just about see the rise in the road level along the Old Kent Road where it crossed the Grand Surrey Canal. And my fanciful memory is that half a century ago when I first came to London, I'm sure you could see that rise was more pronounced, but that may be, as I say, false memory syndrome. Just the other side of the Old Kent Road, though, you have this. You have a street called Canal Grove and some former canal side cottages. Very close to the gasworks, which obviously benefited also from the canal side location. And after this gap for modern warehouses, there is the longest sequence where there's no trace of the canal at all, except the buildings follow the old alignment, because some of the buildings were there before, and then they were rebuilt, but they kept the alignment. And I find it fascinating that even when canals and railways disappear entirely, their traces remain thanks to the alignment of buildings and property lines which were kept. And I'll show you another example later in Forest Hill. This is, again, Surrey Canal Road. Again, a hump on the bridge because the canal went underneath this, showing you where there was a bridge over the canal. All the way from Camberwell to the Croydon junction with Mercury Way, and then on to the River Thames, the Grand Surrey Canal was flat. That meant huge efficiencies. No locks, absolutely level, just go straight through. Locks use a huge quantity of water and they take a lot of time to navigate. But the Croydon Canal was different. Croydon's on a hill, and that means locks to get up and down. And we as a family have done some locks. This is the most challenging, just about. This is the Bingley Five Rise, and the most challenging lock network flights on the whole system in West Yorkshire. This is 2004, 17 years ago, just as we come down the flight on a rather rainy Sunday morning. My wife Joan's on the left holding a rope. Son Paul is steering at the back. Daughter Mary is on the towpath at the front holding another rope, and Lucy is on the boat, which is called Rosemary. Now, there's a great ready reckoner that boaters still use, and we used when planning our holidays, to work out how long a journey is going to be. And this is really important when you're planning where you're going to do overnight, so you're going to do your shopping, and whether you will get around the circuit in the 1 week, 2 weeks, or 3 weeks, or whatever you booked the boat for. The speed limit today, could you mute yourself, somebody, whoever that was? The speed limit today on today's canals are set by British Waterways and continued by the Canal and River Trust. It's 4 miles an hour. So you can travel 10 miles of canal in 2.5 hours. If there are moored boats on one side or the other, or both, and the speed comes down to 1 or 2 miles an hour. And if you exceed that, you get people shouting at you, watch your wash, slow down. But for most canals, you also have to go through locks, and this is far less predictable because often you get to a lock and it's set for you. That means if you're going downhill, the lock is full, you take your boat straight in, you close the gates, empty the lock, you continue on. Going the other way, if you're in lock, the lock is empty. You motor in, close the lower gates, fill the lock, and you open the top gates and travel on. Sometimes, though, 50% of the time on average, the lock's set against you, which means if you're going down the canal, you have to fill the lock first so you can move in, empty it again, and travel on. If you're going up the canal, you might come across a full lock, and you have to empty before starting the process. And as you can tell, that takes a lot of water and a lot of time. Let's go on a bit. This is my daughter Lucy in 2011, 10 years ago, taking us through another flight, the Foxton Locks in Leicestershire. You know what we're talking about. If you have an efficient team, which we did in our family canaling days, it takes an average, maybe with walkie-talkies, operating the lock paddles and opening and closing the gates, you can make good progress. Sometimes moving to the next lock, one person moves to the next lock to make sure it's set for you. Rule of thumb in the canal world, whether or not you've got walkie-talkies, it takes an average of 15 minutes to go through a lock, sometimes less. When the gates are in your favor, sometimes longer when you have to fill or empty a lock before you can move on. Sometimes even longer when there's a long queue of boaters. And I remember the Glengor Canal with behind about four boats one Sunday morning when we didn't even have a newspaper to read. It was a long wait. Nice sunny day, but it was still a long wait. But that means 4 miles an hour and 4 locks on average an hour. Boaters call it the lock mile. And this was bad news about the Croydon Canal. From the south in Croydon to the north in Mercury Way, it ran 9.25 miles. That's 15 kilometers. I'd say 2.5 hours boating without the locks, but it also had 28 locks, which lift it from the level of the Surrey Docks by all of 53 meters or 174 feet, which is the Croydon level. Some of it was on contour levels, which meant that you had stretches where there were no locks whatsoever, but there were actually 3 flights of locks on the whole stretch of 9.25 miles. That means for boaters, an average of 7 hours of lock work on the Croydon Canal. So the total journey time from Croydon to the Surrey Canal junction, or the other way around, is about 9.5 hours. Now, I could walk that route in 3 or 4 hours or so, even at my advanced age of 70.5. Today, the London Overground train from West Croydon to New Cross Gate takes 23 minutes, and another couple of minutes to get on to around Surrey Quays. The Croydon Canal failed because it was slow and inefficient. It also needed a huge supply of water to fill and refill all the locks, even with the steam engine halfway along to pump the water back uphill. This is what happens when the water runs low. That is the Huddersfield NOA Canal in summer 2004, one of our first long distance canal journeys. It totally out of water. Huddersfield NOA Canal has been famous for being low on water for more than 200 years. It's just dreadful. And the Kennington Avon, that's the Kennington Avon, a couple of lovely steam engines there, one from Harvey of Hale on the right, one from Bolton Watt on the left. It has a huge pumping station at its summit level to keep the water still topped up. It still has the problem of low water after 2 centuries. So after a few years, the Croydon Canal was doomed, not just by its inefficiencies, but also by the arrival of the railways. And the great legacy of the Croydon Canal is that the London and Croydon Railway bought it in 1836 for £40,000 or so, and largely used the route for its own track, although with a lot of muck shifting and rerouting on the way. The canal, as I said, partly went on the contours. Contours go loopy around, but the railway company also used the canal during construction to transport its own building materials along the route up to Croydon. Now, the route is still visible, though. Some of it's vanished. This is a bit that's vanished. The southernmost few miles of the canal disappeared under the railway network and the depot at Selhurst. But a little bit further north, in fact, the next station north from West Croydon, Croydon Council has celebrated its heritage with these slabs in the pavement on Station Road, just by Norwood Junction Station. And there's another round the corner on the High Street, just next to this pub, the Ship. And it's called the Ship for a good reason. That passageway at the right-hand side, that's got a gate, very secure gate, used to give onto the Canal Wharf just behind the Ship, which was no doubt good for business as well, to be positioned so near the wharf. At Norwood Junction itself, the canal builders back in 1800 onwards created that wide loop. You see that huge loop of houses that follows the canal, which actually went in the gardens around there, back under the railway where it is now, around that wide loop, following the contour, and then back under the railway. Still 200 years later, reflected in the street layout, and no doubt creates a nice community for the people. And to the northwest of Norwood Junction Station, there is the biggest relic of the old canal, Norwood Lake. Now, it's a beautiful attraction. I was there, as you see from that picture, in the autumn, used for boating and fishing. There were boats just behind the camera, which there's the Croydon Sailing Club, fishing, dog walking, and just walking. It says cycling and swimming strictly prohibited. I don't know if swimming is still prohibited. I certainly saw some people cycling. But this is a very old sign, as you see from the prices of 2 shillings per rod per day. So that's at least 50 years old. But this was a huge lake. It's a bit less than it was at the time. Some of it's been taken over by a cricket pitch, but the reservoir was built and used by the canal company to feed its hungry need for water and water and more water to fill and refill its locks. A bit further north, Betts Park near Anerley Station, that's the next station if you know your stations from West Croydon to London Bridge, Forest Hill to London Bridge. This is near Anerley Station. There's a stretch of water which forms the remains of the actual canal, still with water in it, or still in water, as canal people say. Some purists will sniff and they'll say that's a concrete lined artifice, but it follows the line of the canal and it's detached from the complete waterway, so you need an artificial means to keep it full of water because it's detached from the old reservoir. And for goodness sake, a canal is artificial anyway, so why quibble about an artificial waterway? But it's got ducks and it's got other wildlife in there. And a couple of stops further north, Sydenham, there was another reservoir to supply the canal with yet more water. That whole site is now built on. There's not a drop of water anymore. And one of those houses, my brother and his partner brought up their family. They don't have any damp problems. I have slept in their basement, which would have been below the water line. It was perfectly dry. Moving further north, though, Dacres Wood, just before Forest Hill Station, as you go northwards from Sydenham to Forest Hill. That is the only other surviving stretch of canal tucked away behind some houses in Dacres Road. Dacres with an S, not Dacre as the local name around Blackheath. This is what is now called Dacres Wood Pond. Very hard to get a view of it. It's round the back of some houses, some fairly modern houses, but the pond, as it's called, was kept. It's easier to see it from Google Earth, and they very clearly see that there is an old canal along the railway line behind some houses, and it's there. And I don't know if there's a path through the trees. I suspect there is, but it's probably residents only. Go a bit further north. This is Forest Hill. Station is there. That's the overbridge. I used to live here back in the early 1970s, and I'd never noticed the odd alignment right next to the station, alongside W.H. Smith's shop, which is here. There's a dentist here. I once had my teeth done there. And it continues north of this is the South Circular. And this is, as I said, Forest Hill Station. That was the canal route. And you can still see the alignments south as it goes under the railway line. The bridge, the building lines are still there 200 years later, and they're still there to the north, where there is this thing called Forest Hill Nursery, but I should think that's a plant shop. And if you go up, I'm going to go up here, and this is what's left today. That is, believe it or not, and I went past it daily for 3 or 4 years that I lived in the area. I never knew what I was looking at. That is the towpath up here. The road now is much below. That is down at canal level. You can see the towpath along here. I didn't believe it when I first looked at it. I thought the levels were all wrong. If you put your eye along the railing up there, it does actually line up with the passage on the other side of the South Circular. It's hard to see in real life. And this, where the South Circular heaves past the station, there was once a swing bridge. And anyone who's been on a canal and has opened up a swing bridge to get through, because boats have preference, because the canal was there before the bridge and the road, it's wonderful, especially at rush hour. We've done it lots of times on the canals. Just think if that swing bridge has still been there on the South Circular. Go a bit further north. We're going past to Honor Oak Park Station. The canal looped around away from the railway, which is to the east, to Honor Oak Park Station. No signs of the canal today at all, but this is where the last stretch of the canal headed down to the level of the Thames. See how high it is. And it's a cemetery now. And look at that drop down to the river. Lock 28 was just along the road from where Honor Oak Park Station is now. Lock 13, which was at the next station along, at Brockley Station. That's 16 locks, 4 hours travel to get between Honor Oak Park and Brockley, or the other way around, between what are now 2 adjacent stations on the railway line. That's what, 4 or 5 minutes travel? 4 hours travel on the canals, 4 minutes on the train. This huge drop, which you can see clearly in the picture I took one evening in September, is what I think really killed the canal. 4 hours of hard lock work from Honor Oak Park to Brockley is just ludicrous. Come on. Move on. This next stretch was Shardlows Road in New Cross. I remember I said earlier there were 28 locks on the Croydon Canal. We'd got to Brockley, heading north of the river, and we've still got 12 to go. So there were 12 between Brockley Station, and most of them were along Shardlows Road. There was a flight of locks here, all replaced by houses and road and buses in New Cross. The only sign of, was ever ever a canal, apart from maybe the high walls along the road, and I think that might be a clue, was the Broccoli Barge. This pub, it's a Weatherspoons, I'm afraid, but anyway, the Broccoli Barge. Canal people don't use the term barge these days. They say narrowboat or a wide beam boat. Barge they tend not to say, but this is the Broccoli Barge. Some sources I've read over the last few months say that there used to be a stone construction on the east side of the tracks at New Cross Gate Station, alongside what used to be, as you know, New Cross Gate used to be one of the two termini of the old East London line. And whether or not anything was there decades ago, the story is that this was the site of the lock, one of the locks at coast that was built over by the London and Croydon Railway. But whether or not anything was there decades ago, I've looked and I can see nothing now. Remember, that line was extended as part of the London Overground extension works years ago. And I've looked from the platform end and from the bridge down from New Cross Road, and I could see nothing that looks like it was part of Lock 5 of the Croydon Canal. And then there are 4 more locks to get to what I've already called cynically the Little Venice of South London, the junction with the Grand Surrey Canal. And if you remember that road, Mercury Way, that was actually quite steeply rising from the Grand Surrey Canal up towards Croydon. So that's where the last 4 locks were. Continue east, and we go onto the railway lines. That's the Greenwich Railway. Went over the canal because the canal was there first and was then built later. And then the railway was built later. So it had to bridge the canal. This is what it looked like in the 19th century. And this is what it looked like in September. As close as I could get to the location. The wider, always artists from the 1800s fiddled their dimensions and their proportions of arches. Look at the Thames Tunnel, built by Mark and Isambard Brunel, now used by the East London line. That's completely fake in terms of dimensions. That picture back. Oops, sorry. That I think was exaggerated. You wouldn't need such a wide arch to cross the canal just there. But I don't know, because it's very hard to see because there's a building site and a building materials site. Lots of building right in the whole area, of course. It's very conveniently located. Indeed, it's a short walk from what was going to be Surrey Canal Road station on the London Overground. The site has been protected, although it was protected before the railways were extended to 4 coaches. I extended from 4 coaches to 5, but it's very close to where, if that station is ever built, under the name New Bermondsey, I think. It will be quite convenient for commuters. The canal then ran south of Deptford Park. Oh, and then, yeah. 2 under Evelyn Road. This is the A200. And that canal bridge is still there, celebrating the NHS with those rainbow stripes. I cycled over that many, many times on my way to and from work for years before I realized what it was. One day, I just looked up and saw those lamps. You see those lamp standards. And I thought, there's a curve here. And you've actually got to change gear to go up that, at least I have. And realized it was a canal bridge from the old Grand Surrey Canal. The last stretch takes us into Greenwood Dock. It's been converted to a rather beautiful walkway and garden, a sort of parklet, a long path, a bit like the one at Burgess Park, but much narrower, but still a rather nice place to be on a sunny day in September. And it's got a special treat in that along these walls, there's a poem. And I had to Google it. I had to Google those words, once a canal, etc., to find that they were decorated in 2016 with a poem by Lem Sisse, who's now Chancellor of the University of Manchester. And the poem is actually in this book, Gold from the Lock and Key is the poem. The book is Gold from the Stone. And then here's 4 lines from it. Obviously, it's in copyright. I can't read the whole thing. Where watercourse was and is where you are, this poem is the balance beam. Gongoozlers, let go. Once a canal from river through earth, now walk on the pastures of water. And as canalers will know, gongoozlers are those people who stand by the locks and watch and offer advice and ask where you're going and how far you've come. Anyway, on through, north through this, to what used to be the Surrey Docks, a beautiful park. You see that marking there, which allowed boaters to know how deep the water was, and still some anchor chains screwed into the side of the canal. And again, you know, it's a long stretch of old canal turned into a park. And then it finally emerges into the Thames here by this bridge, which is still there. You can walk across it, no traffic. There's a pub right next to it. It's a long way from Croydon, but until 50 years ago, it was still connected to Camberwell and Peckham via the Grand Surrey Canal. And now it's just a memory, but lots of nice parks. So thank you all.